Great. So hi, everybody. I'm Karen Brammer. I manage the Green Sanctuary Program for the Unitarian Universalist Association. And I'm one of a team of three who have been co-creating this environmental justice practitioners network. The other two include Ali Tharp in her role of Commit to Respond in the executive team, and the programs coordinator for UU Ministry for Earth and the UU Young Adults for Climate Justice. And Elizabeth Mount, who in their role primarily here, saving my butt around the technological, but bringing a lot of expertise both to the technology and to movement building. So the three of us are very grateful to all of you for being here. Tonight, we have a spread of people. Those who have signed up are folks who identify primarily as environmental justice activists, and some who are in discernment about whether they're able and willing at this point to claim that identity. And the purpose of this network is to learn and practice intersectional work. And at the same time, especially tonight, learning to increase, step up, escalate in a non-specific way our involvement in movement, in also resistance and non-compliance, both at a person-to-person level and congregation to community and in larger movement. And so what I want to remind us all is that the setup, the structure for this evening is that both Nora and Caitlin have graciously agreed to let me interview the interviewers, and that will go until about 8:15. And then we'll have about 15 minutes for questions that you'll submit by chat on the chat line. And Ali will bring those questions from the chat, but also from questions that she realizes have not been asked but could be asked. And then we'll do 8:30 for about 20 minutes in small groups, should that work out in our numbers. And then we'll come back about 10 of 9 to do 10 of 9 Eastern to debrief. So I'm going to lift from the 30 Days of Love website, the Fortifying Movement, in which there's in week 4, where it's talking about commitment and sustenance, where the comment is for Unitarian Universalists, standing on the side of love has been a rallying cry for faith and action. But what does it mean to live on the side of love when loving is hard, enraging, boring, even, or scary? And Caitlin, I'm going to quote you, saying, I believe that we are not appointed leaders. Rather, through showing that our concerns and political will extend beyond our own individual lives and stories, we are willing to be transformed in the work, and we then earn the privilege to lead. And with that, I have to tell you, the three of us on this team have been really anticipating your arrival and this conversation, because the three of us, among all those we are connecting with in Unitarian Universalism and the people who are on this meeting, are feeling challenged and feeling a need, feeling engaged and sometimes confused and overwhelmed, but really engaged and ready and wanting. So I think you all know, but it bears repeating, that both Caitlin Breedlove and Nora Rasman together have built Standing on the Side of Love that has become very, I would say, beloved and well-known organizing tool among Unitarian Universalists, and it brings our faith out into the streets and helps us leverage. And instead of me doing all the introduction, Nora, would you take a minute to bring to the fore some aspect of the work that you've done that you would like people to know, and then I'll ask Caitlin to do the same.
Sure, happily. Hi, good evening. As Karen said, my name is Nora Rasman. Just some things to know about me. I've been with the campaign for 3 years on Monday, so that's with me. I'm really proud of what we've been doing over the last year in responding to kind of the current political moment. Just for folks to know a little more about where I'm coming from, I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and was raised at First Unitarian of Milwaukee. Was very politicized and grew up within racial justice organizing within Unitarian Universalism, including something called Groundwork, that was a youth and young adult-led anti-racist organizing collective from 2002 to 2009. And my professional work has really spanned both nonprofit organizational development and anti-racism work and policy and advocacy. And so I joined the campaign about 3 years ago, and I'm really proud of some of the shifts that we've done to really respond to the emerging movement for Black lives. And now I think additional kind of intersectional, but still centering Black liberation and other collective liberation analyses within our social justice work opportunities that we've been able to tap into, and supporting social movements led by people who are directly impacted. And then something just for people to know, kind of things that are bringing me joy right now, which I'm really excited to share, are babies in my life, including a 15-month-old that I live with, cultural workers, and people in my life that I think are taking risks that they never thought that they could. And so, yeah, I'm happy to be here with all of you, and good evening.
Thank you. How about you, Caitlin?
Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Caitlin Breedlove. I don't know many of you, but it's great to be with Allie and Elizabeth and Karen and Nora tonight. I'll keep my bio a little bit brief. I've been a community organizer and a popular educator, which is just a fancy way of saying I've worked with local communities to help them build power and make meaningful changes. Since I was kind of a kiddo and didn't really know a lot of what I was doing. So for about 15, a little bit more years. And most of my work has been focused around the passion that I have for people living in small and medium-sized towns, and a lot of work in the red states. I spent most of those 15 years in the U.S. South, in Tennessee, Georgia, and North Carolina, and I now live in Phoenix, Arizona. I think that a lot of that work, I always think now about how, like, I boil it down. You know, there's lots of things that maybe sound a little fancy to say, but it's actually, I think, been about membership building and building organizations and large memberships, particularly with LGBTQ folks, especially LGBTQ people of color and poor people, and then building organizing that has the spiritual fortitude to help us get it done. So I actually have a great deal of respect for work that has happened in the environmental justice movement. When I was coming up, there's really, I'm dating myself a little bit, powerful work around Cancer Alley, which is a part of the South along the Mississippi River, where there was a lot of incredible Black women, most of whom were dealing with disability and illness in their 50s, doing some incredible work. So I have a lot of respect for that movement and that work, though not a lot of experience, but happy to help pop in or move over any pieces that were helpful tonight. So that's a little bit about me. And I've been at the UUA about a little bit more than a year.
You know, I guess maybe it strikes me that something that's valuable for we Unitarian Universalists to know, if I'm not misrepresenting it here, but that Caitlin and Nora and other people in the Multicultural Growth and Witness staff group, like Dee Dee, et cetera, are people who are organizers in a way that is somewhat new to the Unitarian Universalist Association, and Allie's presence and Elizabeth's presence in particular, where we're getting really rich experience on movement building and also becoming activists ourselves. And so this really is a wonderful opportunity for us. Where I want to move is to say first that when I suggested the title of Grounding for Escalation, I was all excited about the concept and the feeling of what it would mean to center ourselves and ground ourselves as UUs or people of faith, or in whatever way we understand ourselves, in order to step up our work, in order to leverage our work so that it has more impact. And I used the word escalating without really understanding, as now I've learned from Nora and Caitlin, that the word escalation in movement building has a very particular meaning. But in those of us who are on the call and who will listen to this recording represent people who are at the place where it's a real big decision and a challenge to move from being in a social situation where the primary concern has been to not rock the boat, and move to I'm willing to take the risk and be uncomfortable and make others uncomfortable by telling the truth. So that was one way I was thinking of escalation, perhaps misusing the word, and another way of engaging our congregational life so that we're making a commitment to be worthy allies, to be worthy collaborators. So, and I know on all those different levels, the word escalation has different meaning to those who are educated in and have been schooling themselves in movement building. But for us, for those of us who are on the call, it will carry different nuances and colors based on our own locations and what's challenging to us right now. So really, especially when I listened to you talk, you guys did a beautiful conversation after the mobilization, the day after the inauguration, with Lena Gardner and Reverend Ashley, and the conversation really moved into focusing on what it means to be committed to noncompliance. And whether that's on a one-to-one level, personal level, not being nice anymore, but not complying, or whether it's on a congregational level, etc. Whatever way we're positioned in our lives to escalate, what does that take? How have you seen people or congregations or yourselves able to move, to shift from doing good work on an issue to building an intersectional movement in a way that's really including risk-taking? And why do it? What's at stake and how do you do it? Either one of you, both of you.
Nora, do you want to go first?
Sure. I can't see you anymore, so I was like looking. Yes, great. Yeah. What's at stake, I guess, is our souls or the existence of our world. And I don't mean to sound too post-apocalyptic or pre-apocalyptic, actually. But the stakes are really high today. And I think, so in our conversations, Karen, I think that my understanding of escalation, and Caitlin can definitely speak to this at length based on her organizing experience, but my understanding is that it is kind of like a reassessment and reappropriation of resources, time, energy to a specific target. And so for me, thinking about what it means for UUs to escalate would be that we, as a faith tradition or as a congregation, have a very specific target that we are going to reallocate our time and energy and resources towards. So this time does require us to escalate in a different way, I guess, because we are shifting, or we do need to be shifting. And I think that kind of the current time really does call for a broad diversity of tactics. I think when I think about escalation, I think about the gifts that the movement for Black Lives and Black organizers over the last few years have brought us to center the need for rejecting the idea of respectability, or the idea that we need to expect people to act and look and speak a certain way to have our respect and to have our support. And something that I was thinking about in response to your prompts, Karen, was around, so I live in DC and was involved in some activities that took place on January 20th. And there were some really beautiful and necessary conversations that happened because I was part of a really large umbrella group of people who were using a huge variety and diversity of tactics, some of which people didn't agree with. Some on principle didn't believe that other folks should be using whatever tactics they were using. But the goal was to provide a specific kind of disruption, and that the goal was met. So I think that in thinking about how we talk about the diversity of tactics and what's required of us in this time, we can look at kind of the different ways that both aggression and violence to protesters happened between January 20th and 21st in Washington, D.C., where police on the 20th were very proactively aggressive with people, and on the 21st were very proactively inviting and, you know, had a large social media presence affirming the presence of the Women's March in DC proper. So I think for me, the conversation around kind of like escalation is really connected to kind of how are we creating a broad space for people to be able to escalate, deepen in whatever modes they think are of most utility in this time, that aren't also critiquing or damning people who might think that more what I feel like I was taught is militant, but is actually just a different strategy to reach the same goal. So, Caitlin?
I would say that I think, and maybe it's just the tone that Karen sets makes me think about it in a very spiritual way. That I feel like escalation like starts inside, and non-compliance starts inside. And so, you know, around the country, we're hearing a lot of conversations about sanctuary. And, you know, people have different feelings about what that word brings up for them. But I think that one thing that's really significant about it is, as in with the concept of green sanctuary, there are things that are worth protecting, and that starts with looking at what our role is. And I personally, the gift that escalation has given me in different organizing in different ways has been the gift of seeing that, to get to kind of what Nora was talking about, like the soul part. I'm not in it to save anyone else. I'm like in it to save myself, and to have a level of responsibility to the generosity that I've been given to learn the things that I've learned from the teachers that I've had. And so when I think about escalation, I think about just the day-to-day things that I couldn't stomach anymore. And I think sometimes escalating, and, you know, speaking out or non-compliance gets cast as this very like individualistic, heroic acts. And I haven't found that so much. I've found that like courage is contagious, and cowardice is also contagious. And condoning cowardice is contagious. And, you know, it really works for systems that are destroying our world and oppressing our communities, for us to believe in this individualistic idea of one hero. And that one hero is always this like super young, able-bodied white man, you know, and even when it's not, it's like a take on that, right? And so then the rest of us get to sort of abdicate responsibility for courage, because we have these portals of courage that are going to save us, and I haven't found that to be the case. So when I think about escalation, I think about lots of times when I was really scared to do things, or not comply with something. And it was in the not complying that I found courage. So one example I would share that was really, really uncomfortable for me was, feels like a long time ago, but an action that we did in DC with undocumented folks who were Black and Brown and their allies. And we did it at the LGBT congressional offices. And boy, was the head of that office is a white gay man. His name is Brad. And he was really, really mad. He was really, really mad. And he was really mad because he was like, we're y'all's friends, like we're your allies. Like, how could you do this to us? It was really uncomfortable, partially because I got mad and wasn't doing a very good job of chilling out enough for the goals to be met of the action. But one of the things that we did say to him that I didn't do it very much justice, but my comrades did, was like, we're so glad that you feel like you're an ally to this work. And we really, like, the folks in the community were like, we just can't wait anymore for you to show us that and not just tell us that. And we just, we're asking you not to say that you're a friend, but to be a champion alongside us today. And I think that's the moment that we're in, real talk. And I'll say that as an LGBTQ person that lives in a red state, that's having to do a lot of family planning around my own personal life. And I know a lot of us are dealing with that too, whether we're partnered or not, whether we have kids or not, in a community where, our next door neighbors are Sikhs. And I don't think we've done what we can to talk to them about how to build community defense with them, because we're always off with something on a flip chart that's higher up the list, right? So I come to the question of noncompliance and escalation with a lot of humility at this point in my life, and a lot of imperfections. But I think that it actually is about figuring out where are the places where we're ready to go further, because I think there's an unveiled level of targeting on the backs of a whole bunch of communities in this country right now. So I know, Karen, you're going to get to other questions, but I think the time is now to escalate, and escalation doesn't always mean, that polarizing confrontation, but it also is asking of us to be direct, and sometimes to confront with love, or sometimes to speak up when there's silence about things, and sometimes to bring voice and ears and listening to spaces where those things might not be in the communities we live in. So that's a little bit about how I'm thinking about it. I don't want to go on and on, Karen, because I know you have other questions.
Well, hopefully the other questions and stories will help you go more or further into what you wanted to say but didn't have time. But honestly, those of us who are motivated by our awareness about what's happening to the planet, to the environment, to other beings, including other human communities, are very often, I'll speak for myself, knowing that sometimes this is true for members of Green Sanctuary teams and sometimes true for other environmental activists, but that it's really hard sometimes to bring our passion around the environment into alignment with the attentive and open-hearted work of building relationship, and authentic relationship that's not based on my goals, but to build intersectionality. And that's part of that's really what we are doing with our environmental justice practitioners networks, is trying to figure out how to move out of the silo of just working on environment, and what it would look like to do environmental justice work in a culture that's very deeply segregated, and in congregations that very often have a primary history of doing our justice work around philanthropy or being the experts and being the helpers or saviors, etc. And so how do we orient ourselves as Unitarian Universalists to work with people who are at risk of environmental catastrophe or displacement or physical harm or death at the hands of the state or corporations, and in situations that are now emboldened by hate that's publicly sanctioned. So what we're looking for is what you can share with us, a memory or something that stands out for you about how a person or community breaks through that lack of skill in building collaboration and is making headway in building real collaboration, including non-compliance. But we're hungry to hear stories of how that happens because we're trying to figure out in our own hometowns.
Do you want to go first, Caitlin?
Sure. I have some ideas, and then I know, Nora, that you have a bunch of experiences and a really strong skill set around building collaborations. A couple of things that I would share, like sometimes we get so complicated about this issue, and starting more simply can be really important. So one thing that I used to train organizers for a living. And so when you're doing that, like you have to find ways to make jokes because it's like training baby dragons, you know, like they're like tearing your ear off and you're like, why my ear? Why me? Why right now? Okay. Like, you know, claw the furniture up. So
I bet we have some dragons on this conference call. Yeah. On this website. Yeah.
It's my favorite, my favorite kind of folks to work with. And you got to find jokes. So I'd always like be like, whoa, friends, how about being a helper, not a hurter? Like, can we just start there? Like help, not harm. Not doing things we weren't asked to do, just like maybe doing what we're asked to do. That's a great way to start to build a relationship. One relationship I built when I was organizing many years ago in Alabama with a congregation there was that I literally just swept the church during the meeting and did dishes for like to build trust with them for like weeks. I mean, I was on some organizing stint. This was right after Hurricane Katrina. I was like, I just did it. I didn't, run my mouth a lot. I didn't interject my good ideas. Right? I was like, it started with that. So I think that's a really important thing to think about is a great opportunity is just go to an event, ask if you can help out, right? Like a great way to start a relationship is actually literally like, oh, here's what they're asking folks to do. And we don't need to start relationships by making suggestions for groups, especially little grassroots groups that are like used to having folks kind of be like, think that they haven't thought stuff through, like, just kind of doing what's asked to do. And then I think the other thing is like flexibility, going with the flow. A lot of times this is super challenging for me at this point in the work because like I kind of think like I have a good idea or I'm like, maybe they didn't think this through. And sometimes if I like give it kind of like 3 like beats, like let it kind of go, I'm like, oh, it unfolds that actually somebody already thought of that. Like I didn't actually have to get in there. Like I just let it breathe a minute. And then I think being present is really important. If you're going to try to build a relationship, like be present and don't ask leading questions. Like if you have a question, don't take up a bunch of time, but like have it be a real question, a human question when you can see that, someone's not distracted and trying to grab 2 kids and this plate of veggie trays and, help folks out. And then the last thing I'd say is like, it's a practice. So practice, like, do the work. And that doesn't have to be like, we have really different, physical abilities, time capabilities, financial constraints. Sometimes the practice is like, there's an organization that just, needs you to send petitions. I worked in a campaign once where it was a mostly people of color campaign. And there was a white man coming out of a faith community. He was in his mid-60s. His name was Bob. And one of my closest colleagues loved Bob because what Bob did was he sat at home and looked for the op-eds that were anti-immigrant. And he just responded to every single one. He just wrote a response to every single one. And everyone just loved him. That was his role. He really was into his job and he did an awesome job. And he had great organizers that helped load him into a job that was a good role. But I think that sometimes it's like just a starting place, everybody wants more collaboration, suggestions, and ideas from folks they know. And folks are doing the work. So I think there are a lot of different roles. I think we're in a moment where actually movement organizations are scampering behind masses of people. The Women's March is a great example where like there's way more people out there doing it than there are organizers being like, now we're telling you what to do. I mean, that's a falsity, right? People are in motion. We have to figure out how do we help support folks to actually take action, because they're not being motivated by the us's of the world. They're motivating, you know? So how do we engage them? So those are some things I would say.
Do you know, I will add that I talk to lots and lots of congregational leaders around the country who are working on Green Sanctuary, and doing environmental projects in their locale is far and wide the hardest thing that anybody does. And some of it is because we don't have practice and we're afraid of making mistakes. There are other reasons, but I would say many believe that there are not people in our locale who are communities of color or marginalized communities organizing on what we perceive as environmental justice issues. What would you say to that? Either or both of you.
Nora, you got thoughts?
You go first, but I do have thoughts here.
I mean, I think that that one thing that's really interesting is looking at the depth of which white supremacy works in us. And I know sometimes when we say that phrase, it's like it just gets very like ballooned and far away. But I mean it very literally. Like, what does it mean to engage in the reality that like we've actually been told the earth is not sacred, and we've been told that other human beings are not sacred, and the other human beings are not sacred. We're drilled every single day with brainwashing, just that white people and white kids and white elders and white families matter the most. And sometimes we think like, I don't think that, but in reality, we're very situated to not see how folks are struggling, which is why, you know, asthma is not seen as a racialized or classed condition, right? Who lives close to toxic waste is not politicized. And so I think that the best way to do it is to start to think about like, what are all the different ways we could be engaging what the question of environmental justice is and does, and then looking at who's moving and looking at their work and being open that maybe what we thought the work existed is not all the work that existed, because some of it might not compute to us, because I know that I tend to see what makes sense to me in my cultural context. So I would say it's like how to actually be like, oh, well, this is interesting. Because I think actually environmental justice work is not happening in every community. But there is community building happening in every community, despite the isolation that's trying to push us away from our relationship to each other, our relationship to the planet. So that's some thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, I think a very specific example, I don't know if others have had this experience, but my childhood, and I think this is kind of like a joke for people who were raised UU, is that the way we understand just the environment generally was like through recycling. It was like a highly finite understanding of like, this is something that you do, and if you do this, then environmental justice will happen. And that wasn't like the direct theme that we were taught, but I think that was kind of what I absorbed. And so I think to Caitlin's point around kind of environmental justice, as I understand it, and I see the question in the chat box, I'm grateful that people that have the wisdom are also answering it, but like that it is so directly connected to like land sovereignty and autonomy and white supremacy. And to your question around collaboration, Karen, I think that, and a number of you I know have been at Standing Rock and spent time there too, so I feel like your knowledge and experiences would be super valuable. But I was so humbled to be able to spend some time with Karen Van Fossen and the UU congregation in Bismarck, who I think really are modeling a kind of collaboration that a lot of other UU spaces, especially UU communities and congregations that are in red states or are just geographically isolated in different ways, can learn from. And I think there are a number of things that I learned from that collaboration that has been imperfect and really hard, and something that is still happening, 10 months on. And so I think kind of some of the threads of what I've both heard from Karen and then in conversations with congregants while I was there were that the congregation was so consistently showing up across the board. So Karen had shown up and like centered the requests of leadership that were through relationships that were with people in the congregation. And those are folks who were members of the tribe directly. And so like, how are our congregations directly in relationship with people who are most impacted, and whether or not they be in our congregations, how are we building trust with them over the long term so that when the ask happens, we're able to show up. I think there's been a level of deliberateness, which I know Kaylin also lifted up on a webinar we did last night around kind of understanding that means that we might not always be the most quick. And it feels like because we're living in crisis, that's really hard for us spiritually sometimes to slow down and like assess, but like our ability and willingness to be deliberate in the name of being accountable to who we want to show up for is really necessary. Some other things, I think that they're really clear about what they're bringing. And so they have assessed as a congregation some of the things that they're willing to offer. And this fall, when we were on the Revive Love Tour, I think a phrase that we used often was that we were providing an offering and not an ask. And that was the understanding that when you're in relationship and it is reciprocal, and we are entering at really different places because of structures of power and oppression. For those of us who have access and privilege, even to be in an incorporated church that has some rights under the state that other groups don't, what are we willing to bring and what are we actually offering? And so that might mean that we're resource mapping our congregation to recognize who has what skills, who are willing to donate, and who is retired and has time during the day and can drive people. And I think that the congregation has done that in a way that's really, really helpful and necessary. And this is a congregation of 60 people. It's not a huge, and they're doing it. And I think something that we really can learn a lot from them and other congregations in red states is that they have like refused to back down, even though they've received a high level of public scrutiny. So that's from other faith communities, and that's just socially from predominantly, if not exclusively, white people who live in Bismarck who have really been targeting them. And I don't think it's been talked about that publicly, but I think that how we can support even our UU congregations in places that have a lot of lessons and knowledge about what it means to be organizing in a political moment such as this is really necessary. So I would say kind of across the board, both the Standing Rock Solidarity, that UU congregation of Bismarck, and then I think there are many other UU congregations that probably have some similar overlapping stories about what that both solidarity work coupled with internal political education for supporting their congregants and the communities that their congregants are part of within Bismarck is super necessary also.
I'm wondering how much of that, I caught much of what you were saying because I could imagine it, I could see it happening at the UU congregation in Bismarck, Mandan. And if you haven't seen a congregation doing it in action, I wonder how many people on this call don't have a strong sense of what it actually means or what it could actually look like. And so I'm wondering if there are any other we're all going to see escalation of evil, and we're all overwhelmed by it, and we're all enraged or disgusted, but not all of us are trained to know how to choose our moment or to know what it is we do have to bring. And so I wonder if either or both of you can personalize it a little bit more, help us understand as listeners and learners here what it might look like as an internal story, as my personal story. How do I know that it's time for me to step up? How do I move through this quagmire of pain and observing horrifying things happening, anticipating horrifying things happening? How do I move through to know what to bring and when to bring it? Do you have any stories for us on that?
I think one of my favorite stories about this is actually a story that you touched on already in the quote that you used, Karen, thanks for that, is this thing that we came up with and used a bunch in our organizing work in the South called willingness to be transformed in the service of the work, which is not a new concept. But one of the things that we used to do, so that came out of one of my dear comrades that I worked with for many years. We used to go get a motel in North Carolina on the beach, and have a meeting there every year. And I always loved that meeting, but I always dreaded it because we would drink some beer and eat shrimp. And then at the end of the afternoon, she would ask me, are you willing to be transformed in the service of the work? I'd be like, dang. And I'd be like, yes. If, I'd search my spirit. And if the answer was yes, I'd say yes. And the reason it was hard to say yes was that after I said yes, she would say to me, well, I'm glad you are. And because you are, I actually need you to shift on this, and this.
Wow.
And I need more from you on this, and this. But it wasn't a trick. It was like a very genuine spiritual practice that we did together. That I think was actually the cornerstone of my growth as an organizer. I think it was the cornerstone practice. It's probably still the cornerstone practice. It also the hardest pair practice I would do. Because, it was just some of it, we would just spend pre-time being like, I don't want to shift on this. Like, I'm really frustrated at them. I'm really mad at this. I'm really, I feel like this was unfair. We took it in the teeth for this when we were doing the work and it just feels bad. And, we would go on and on. But I think that that practice has really helped me understand how to ask. Reverend Ashley Horan said, that she's often, one of her cornerstone practices is asking if it's her shift for the revolution or for movement. Is it my shift now? Which is it my turn? And I think in some ways it's always our turn, but then there's also this question of when is it our time to move forward? So I'm not sure that gets exactly to all the things you're asking about, Karen, but I think when I think about what my spiritual framework has been, not because it's been so fancy or awesome, but it's kept me in the work a little while. And I say a little while because a lot of people have lived a lot longer than me and done this work a lot longer than me. It's been how those relationships and the gratitude I have for, again, being taught the things I have and my commitment to faithfulness in that has meant that's been my antidote to cynicism and to bitterness and really to quitting, to be honest, and it has been relationships that's kept me in the work. It's been the other people that are like, I'm counting on you. You promised, and I believe in you. Right. And those things coming together, there's definitely been some tough love in it. And then I think on the spiritual level, one thing I was thinking about in prepping for this evening is, I think it is really daunting. And I think it's really daunting partially because, as I think we've seen by the incredible model set by Standing Rock, we're struggling for the now and we're struggling for the later. We're struggling for the legacy and we're struggling in the moment. It's ourselves and the earth and the folks around us right now. And it so impacts what comes after us. And those things are daunting, but I try to keep my feet firmly placed in both places because I actually believe, as Nora was referencing the Revive Love tour that we did with Reverend Sekou and the Holy Ghost, he talks about, in a lot of church traditions, they say, things are going to get better with time, when we pass, or this idea of heaven. But now is the time to make things right. So I've been thinking about that a lot under Trump and hearing a lot of people I love who frankly have a lot more to lose than I do, saying what if this is actually the time to not just bring it back to the status quo of before this moment? What if this is the time to make things right? And it might cost a lot. What if we're contending with that? Which I think is a really sobering thought, but really important because we both have a lot more to lose, but also a lot less to lose in terms of, I think given what's at stake, how concerned are we going to be with sort of what folks think of us versus what's at stake. And I try to ask myself that a lot.
Caitlin, thank you. Nora, how about you? We have a couple more minutes and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. If you want to weigh in. You're still muted, Nora.
Great. Mic check. Great. Yeah, a different time. I do think something I was thinking about in prepping for this is kind of the central importance of humility, and how I've heard people talk about humility in the past and how it doesn't feel like it's actually what we need in this time. And so I think that humility is necessary, and especially for those of us who are white, or those of us who are cis, or have a number of identities that provide us privilege every day. I think that like humility is necessary because it mandates that we name what we do not know, and recognize that people are experts in their own experience and we are not, no matter how deeply our relationships are created. But I think that oftentimes the way that I see humility manifest is in a almost resentment or discomfort with power that I don't think is what's necessary in this time, especially. And so I think for white folks who are people who I feel very connected to and committed to organizing and supporting, I think that I have a lot of questions about kind of what power looks like that's accountable and non-coercive, and that like humility must lead our work, but we can really be only as helpful as we're also rooted in a recognition that we're like all powerful beings, and we all do have power. And I think that as a white person, I have definitely been told how powerful I am, but my womanness and my queerness and other identities that I have let me know that I might not have power in certain spaces. And so I think I've really been sitting with how we as faith communities are both inviting people into humility that's rooted in our own power, but also recognizing the necessity of moving through that to understand that power can look different than we've been taught, and that we can be empowered while also centering the experiences of people who we're seeking to be in relationship with, who we might not share identities with. So I think that's kind of a spiritual centerpiece that I've been marinating a lot on. Something else I would offer is that I studied and worked with a number of scholars who were in relationship with Dr. Howard Thurman. And he talked a lot about common ground, which when I was first presented with it, felt like it was really futile and shallow, because it felt like unity, or it felt like it was, going back to yesterday's webinar, I think Ashley used the language of kind of like flattening identities in a way that didn't actually recognize how power and structures of oppression operate. But I think that like common ground, actually from Dr. Thurman's perspective and through further reading, really recognizes that like we have common experiences as humans, but to get to a place where we understand common ground, there must be deep personal, political, and spiritual grounding in understanding what our identity means and what it means to each other. And so that means that people of color's humanity is eroded within capitalism and white supremacy. And so that means that we as humans, whatever our identities might be, must do the personal work that allows us to get to some place of common ground. So I don't use the language of common ground within my work, but if I think about collective liberation, it does feel very similar or aligned with this concept of what we are all building towards, which is visionary and unapologetic and non-reformist. And that is actually what we also need in these times. So that is like what keeps me up in the night, is kind of this visionary understanding of what collective liberation will be, and knowing that like as much as we are fighting structures that are directly going to be harming, deporting, killing people, how are we actually also at the same time investing in creating different systems and different structures that are non-oppressive and non-coercive, and actually center the expertise and experiences of people who are most directly impacted today. So.
Woo! Thank you. We have some time where I'm going to ask Allie to pick up questions that may not have been addressed, or Allie, if you have a burning question you want to bring to the fore. And then I'm going to ask Elizabeth to give us our task in our small groups, and then we'll come back and regroup after that. So Allie, what are you thinking?
Well, no one has actually written a question yet, and I suspect that it's because the conversation was too capturing. So we might want to give it a minute to see if other people have burning questions.
Do you have one on top of your head, Allie?
What's at the top of my head is a quote that I could read, and it's by a journalist whose partner, he was a gay man, and his partner was lost in the AIDS epidemic in the 80s. And so it's a book of short stories that I have called Flesh to Bone, and this is at the very beginning, and it just I was like, okay, I'm glad I bought this book because it just hit me so hard. So the person who wrote this is Paul Monette, and he became a big activist for that movement. And he says, tell yourself, none of this ever had to happen, and then go make it stop with whatever breath you have left. Grief is a sword, or it is nothing.
Wow.
Yeah, so I think it was the conversation about just the questioning at this moment, and the importance of what we do with this moment, and with our personal search for purpose. So I'm just going to look at the chat room and see what's on here. So there's one question coming from Shaya. What do you do in the moments when you really feel despair? Do you have moments when you start to believe that we won't win?
And some people are asking for that quote or poem to be put in the chat, Allie.
I think it was me because I just loved it.
Yeah, beautiful.
And I heard it many years ago, and I haven't heard it in so long. Thank you so much for reading that. I've had a lot of moments of despair. I had a good heavy one after Election Day. I think that, to be 100% frank, because that's just what time it is, I had to redefine winning. Really redefine it. And I'm not talking about pragmatically redefine it, redefined it past the significance of my own life and continuing to be alive, define it. And I actually think what was really helpful with that was moments where things were just so incredibly out of my control. I actually think Escalation helped me go there. And that could be, a much longer conversation about spiritual and embodied transformation in escalated experiences. I have had some really profound healing experiences that were byproducts of civil disobedience and time I spent in jail. It was certainly not the point, but it happened. And I think that part of it was just that that I knew where I was on something, and I knew that if today was the last day, that I don't have any regrets. And I think that's actually a profound thing that a lot of people feel quietly and loudly in different parts of their life. I don't actually think it's that special of a thing. I actually think it's a really amazing thing to get to have the opportunity to live your life in a way that's okay, if this is what it is, then this is what it is. But I think I actually think there's a depth of some questions about mortality and meaning that redefined winning for me. So now I define winning as it's the absolute stretching of everything I can. I mean, I think it's really encapsulated in that beautiful quote, and I know deep down when I've done what I could. other people can be impressed with me all day long. I'm not impressed. I'm not impressed. I'm not impressed on that timeline. I'm not impressed by that pace. I'm not impressed by what's defined by, whatever, media or money or whatever. I know when I've given what I could and when I haven't. And that is, that's all I got, but I mean, the despair is real. I personally don't let it, stop me. And I surround myself with people who are way more courageous than me. That has been, I mean, I'm like, man, it's just not that complicated when you're surrounded by people who, their courage really knocks me over every single day. And I think that's critical,
So, yes, someone just asked if comments from others are invited. Totally. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please put it in the chat window. And then I wanted to ask a question just to give a bit of opportunity for y'all to talk about what's on the horizon with Standing on the Side of Love. Like there was this statement of conscience that's been signed on by hundreds of congregations to take action jointly with the UUA and UUSC. So yeah, in terms of like, how are we denominationally grounding for escalation right now? And if there's anything you want to share about what's coming up imminently.
Nora, you need to unmute.
I keep hitting, excuse me. Okay, you want me? I can get started, Caitlin, and you can fill in. Cool. Well, I can tell you kind of some of the mechanics of the things that are definitely happening in the next few months that I'm super juiced about. So we're concluding 30 Days of Love on Valentine's Day, and have been hearing from a lot of folks kind of Caitlin's weekly messages and then some of our complimentary resources that I think are really hitting folks where they need, which is talking about kind of this sustenance, this long-term, this bringing folks along to be bolder activists like Gail is asking about. And I think that we're hoping to continue to create resources, at least between now and GA, knowing that things shift there and kind of that's kind of a launching point for things at times, to give people the resources and tools that they're asking for right now. So I know that we have a podcast that I linked to at the top of the hour, but I'll put in the chat box again, called Fortification. And it's conversations between Caitlin and other leaders within social movements. And I think we've heard, and I myself, as someone who's been able to witness the conversations and listen to them, have learned so much about the questions that you're raising, Shia, about how people stay in it for the long haul, about how people walk away and come back, and so we're going to be doing a second round of interviews. And so if you subscribe to Standing on the Side of Love, or if you don't already, please go to our website and give us your email. Then you'll hear from us. We're actually looking for people's suggestions for who you think we need to be interviewing, like who is a spiritual leader, whether they be ordained or not, that you feel like is really supporting your growth and letting you know that you are grounded and supporting the organizing work that you want to do or that you're already involved in. So that's a very specific thing that we're going to be doing. I'm also super excited about our involvement and support for the Grow Racial Justice that's taking place before General Assembly. And we were able, that's where we met a number of you, and so it's going to be taking place for youth and young adults, both of color and white folks, in caucus and then in shared space right before GA. So those are like two specific ways that you can find us, both online and in person in New Orleans. And Caitlin, if you want to talk a little bit about the UUA USC stuff, I feel like you might have a better sense.
I totally want to do that. And I was just like getting absorbed in this latest comment about there are only cycles. So let me just hold off on reading that because I'm really into that, and talk about what we're doing. I think the other thing in this moment that's really key that we could have a whole nother conversation about is alliance and partnership and building alignment. And I firmly think that none of us can do what the moment calls for by ourselves. So a lot of what the UUA and UUSC is talking about right now is how to think about how we engage the question of expanded sanctuary and how we support communities that are doing that work. And by expanded sanctuary, I mean that sometimes the word sanctuary is only associated with undocumented communities. And of course, we mean folks who are undocumented, and we also mean folks that are Muslim, that are activists with records. Specifically, after the executive order today, it's just clear we don't have to wait and see for what Trump is going to do specifically to. I really have reason to think, activists of color with records, and Muslim folks, of course. So there are communities all around the country that are moving petitions to tell their mayors that they need expanded sanctuary. There are governors. There's so much happening around this. And so we're trying to figure out a strong way, both to support UUs in their local communities, to build the kind of community protection or community defense networks that people want to, and how to be able to do that and say, I don't want my neighbor deported. I don't want my neighbor's kids harassed at school. I don't want more incarceration. I actually want to push back in this moment. This is my town. This is my county. This is where we live, and we want to change that. So that kind of work, how do we figure out the best tools? But then also, how do we just be strong partners for these courageous movements and these courageous local groups that are working so hard? And I'm not going to front on the issue or be disingenuous. It's going to be really hard. Phoenix has one of the strongest community defense networks in the country, and we weren't able to stop the deportation of a loved one here last night, the first person to be deported under Trump. And as one of my friends so beautifully put, she was ripped out of a community that loved her. So I have no great news on how easy this work is going to be, friends. But I think that's all the more reason that we need to play our role, and the things that we learn in the courage that we bring to our local work can feed and teach other people. We're going to have a lot to learn from all of the people in different places. We badly need to know what we can learn from our successes and our setbacks. So I think the focus will be on that. And specifically, the focus will be also on how to be inside of those partnerships, no matter what roles we're all playing. I'm seeing it as a ever expanding team, right? That's not about any one institutional location. So that's a little bit about what's coming, and the Declaration of Conscience is a strategy we haven't been working on that much, but some of our colleagues have, to sort of just find out who's the circle inside many circles and with many adjacent circles that are feeling ready to escalate involvement and engagement. So that's what I got on that.
Beautiful. Thank you. Hey, Allie and Elizabeth, I'm seeing that we're like 4 minutes into our small group time, for which we had like 10. And I'm wondering, I don't see you there, Elizabeth, but how are y'all feeling about whether we break out into small groups? I see that, Allie, you might have wanted to read something that Jesse wrote. Shall we wing it and be creative? What do you, I don't see you, Allie. Elizabeth,
I'm here.
what do you think?
Oh, yeah. Hi.
Yeah.
I would love to read. Jesse says that they do not have a mic, so I wanted to read this comment aloud, also for the benefit of people on the phone who don't have the chat window.
Thank you.
And then I want to honor Elizabeth's effort to put us into breakout groups, so I would leave that to them.
It's ready as soon as you are.
Awesome, Elizabeth. So after this is read, we'll go to Elizabeth managing us into our small groups, and remind us, Elizabeth, when we get there, what our job is.
Okay.
Go ahead, Allie.
So this is from Jesse Ford. My comment is simply about despair. There really is no winning versus losing. There are only cycles. It's just another binary. All of these impulses will always be with us as a human community. So despair is a way of being vulnerable enough to be present to achingly deep disappointment, but then become a point of hope. There is no winning. There is only each of us and all of us and what we do in each moment. We seek to amplify our impulses towards justice, gratitude, compassion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse.
Elizabeth, move us forward from that beautiful place.
Yeah. Yeah, so we have breakout rooms ready to go. Our breakout rooms are going to be about 5 people a piece. And
nice.
When I hit the button for people on phones, it should just move you automatically. If you have a computer for video and a phone for your audio, please type in the box to me what your phone number is right now so that I don't split you into 2 breakout rooms, because that's super confusing.
You got
all
one.
right. Thank you, Jesse. I will make sure that you are in your breakout room with your ear and your face. That's wonderful. And the questions that we asked you to consider coming into this experience were times when you have felt deeply grounded with your spiritual and values-centered justice work, and what made the experience feel that way. What's the emotional difference for you in the ways that you organize and confront injustice when you're grounded in your faith and values? And my hope is that if you have time, you can also move from that to say what kind of escalation that grounding makes you feel ready for. What kinds of deepening? Where do you feel ready in your spirit to open yourself to a transformation? Please make sure that either your facilitator or someone in your group is going to take responsibility for reporting back to us in a few sentences if there were some especially important or thoughtful or spirit lifting things that come out of your conversation. And with that,
you'll automatically bounce us back in. We don't have to do anything, right?
I will indeed.
Thank you.
So we will bounce back in. Did we say at 10 to the hour?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. All right. In that case.
Have a wonderful conversation, everybody. See you soon.
All right.
Drum roll, please.
All right. You should be invited to join your breakout.
You have to click on Join Breakout.
Mm-hmm. Hello?
Okay. So Elizabeth is here and working on saving the day.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin Waddick. I'm in Vermont. Can you hear me?
Yes, we just got you. Thank you, Lynn.
Woo, unmuted. I'm so glad you let me know that. Thank you.
Yep.
All right.
Thanks.
Have a good conversation.
Bye. Okay, we have Caitlin and Allie, and who else?
Deborah Dewey from the Albany, New York congregation.
Awesome.
Ed Lyon from Unitarian Church of Baton Rouge.
Hi, Ed.
Hi, Allie. We talked earlier in the summer.
Yeah, I remember you. Who else?
Hi, Marcia from Akatinku Church in Burke, Virginia.
Hey. I'm not sure if you got the info, but you have to click to join the breakout room. Are you able to do that? There should be a little pop-up window.
Something of nature, like the bark of trees really works for me a lot, and I stand in the sunlight, like I just sit with the sun beating on me, and I also talk to safe people about my pain. And then it doesn't stay inside, it gets out. That's really important, not to just keep it inside. You need to find, I think, safe people to be in community with. So that's what I do to get grounded. And when I do that, I start to laugh with other people, and I start to feel inspired because I'm not alone. And I'm energized because I'm working with other people to take action and to resist. And so action is the thing that keeps me.
And then I get really put out with my UU friends who worry a whole lot about safety. And so when you mentioned that thing about redefining success in such a way that it doesn't necessarily have to include your own continued well-being, that meant something to me.
And it's so deep because that is such a, it's the threshold of all self-determination, right? Which means we don't get to choose for anyone else. And we go to chin check anyone else about how their risks aren't enough because we're not living in their skin and we're not living their lives. And we don't get to decide. I mean, that's a really, safety is of something people have very different conceptions and understandings of based on where they're.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sky. Thank you for sharing all that. Other folks?
I can go. Here to Shia, and I'm in Boston. And
Well, the closest thing I guess, is we do have pipeline issues out here in upstate New York as well. There pipelines coming across from North Dakota to transport the oil from the Bakken fields out there down through Albany, which we're just west of Albany, and then down the Hudson River. And the trains also come through. And that's also, you know, with what happened in Montreal maybe 3-4 years ago, that village that had the quote bomb train that went through, the oil train that exploded on its way through the village. And so we do kind of feel concerned about things like that with both the trains and the pipelines coming through.
We are back. Those on the phone who don't know, we are back with the main group. And Karen, you are muted.
Elizabeth, you are muted also. Would you like to unmute and bring us together?
Yes, thank you. I think we're just waiting for one or two folks to come back from the breakout rooms. Closing in about 5 seconds.
I've been there, like every last second, we got to use it.
Yeah, for sure. And I didn't realize that phones, it bounces immediately because they do an automatic thing. So sorry about that. I hope you got at least a moment with the broadcast message to wrap up a little. So thank you all for your time together and your conversations. If we'd like to just go around, either the facilitators, or if your facilitator helped you choose another person who wants to report back from your group, we would love to hear one or two things that felt especially valuable from your time. So, Allie, do you want to start? Or?
Sure. And I feel it makes sense to carry the burden because I forgot about this whole reporting back stuff. So we just talked. And mostly we talked about the value of community and collaboration and coming together in big groups to find commonality, and then talked also about struggles where you have a social justice task force and everyone comes in with their one passionate issue and it's not in common, and so there's a lack of direction, and so that's what we talked about for a fair amount of the time is you know, trying the great inspiration that we can sometimes get from working in our congregations, and then also the challenge of you know, finding the commonality and working together on the huge multitude of issues that we have and that we care about.
Thank you. Karen, do you want to report back from your group?
Sure. What a pleasure. What an honor to be in these conversations. Claudia, the piece that came strongly for me out of your mouth was that you needed to find your heart piece and operate from there, and to put your gift out there, trusting that your gift combined with all the other gifts is what's called for now, and being on the streets in order to be bearing witness is really what keeps you being on the street. And Jesse, it really resonated and was a clear statement that praying in community, having spiritual practice on your own, but also in community, is so much a part of wholeness and building connection and renewal and reflection. And Gary talking about leaning on that, setting examples, really gaining momentum from the successes and the sacrifices from people who've gone before us. And also ceremony, acknowledging that ceremony is an incredible, powerful way for us to move in the world. So that's what I'll end with.
Thank you so much. Caitlin?
Sure. So I got to engage with Kristen and Shia and Sky, and Shia and Sky chose to share. And we'd been in Spacey before in New Orleans, so it was great to see both of them again and hear them. So one of the things that I really took as threads in some of the conversation is, what is safety and how does that relate to isolation and to our actual lived experience in our bodies? And how are we dealing with when we're up against that all the time? And what happens when in UU communities we mean really different things when we say safety and what are the differences of just daily lived experience and privilege, around. We talked some about in terms of folks who are transgender, but I was also thinking about in terms of, and I think we all were, disability and race and religion and sexuality, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked some about that. And we also talked about, Shaya shared this wonderful quote from some Indigenous leadership at the National Day of Mourning that happens in Massachusetts around Thanksgiving every year, that this is a time of great shift and our souls are choosing to be on the earth in this time. And the way to cope with that is connecting self to the broader earth and to existence. And I found that very profound, like thinking about I have a resonance with feeling a sense of choosing to be here in this time, which sometimes feels antithetical to how the day-to-day is going. Why? But that was really great to hear. And then we had a conversation about what happens when people were in really different contexts and people are telling us which risks to take or which moves to make. And Sky bringing, I think, such a valuable experience of going back to home community in Franklin, Ohio, with a lot of poor white folks in the community that Sky's coming out of. And what does it mean when you actually have people who are very politically polarized, but believe that it's the end times for very different reasons, and really connecting with the experience of what does it look like to actually be breaking isolation and engaging people with the experience they're having right then. And then the final thing that I heard from Shaya, but I think was much in the conversation, is what does it mean when you see other people being resilient and that helps build your resilience, and you're saying, wow, if they're doing it, I can do it too, and how much relationship is deep in that. So those were some of the lessons. It was a rich conversation.
Thank you so much. I believe, Nora, did you have a group as well?
Totally, yes. I was with Gail, Alicia, and Marsha. I think, I'll be quick. I think the things that came out that were really resounded with me were kind of like the physicality of grounding that folks talked about, and kind of what it means to reconnect with earth and actually be able to touch or engage with something in a tactile manner as a way to recenter ourselves and each other. And then there was a huge question about the pressure that existing organizations are feeling to absorb people who are just coming into movement, and kind of how we bring people into the work in the way that we want to bring them in. And kind of that there's so much excitement and pride and just energy around being able to onboard folks, but then the problem of being able to do it in a way that maintains the integrity of the work that we're already doing. So holding kind of the tension of the newly emergent, and I think Alicia put it kind of we've been tapped out, we were ready for you, we're so happy you're here, and kind of how do we support you to now come in and be able to show up. So.
Yeah, that's super valuable. Thank you. And then I believe, Irene, were you our final group leader? Lovely.
I found it interesting that Angela could talk to us from the perspective of a Canadian who has gone through the reconciliation with the First Nations as a country, and then working on an issue of wetlands near Niagara Falls, and having some of those folks say, this is what reconciliation looks like, partnering on trying to preserve these wetlands, which are in fact on First Nation lands. Nancy talked a little bit about how easy it is to get involved when you live near the state capitol in upstate New York. I hadn't thought about that. I live in Central Florida, and I'm a long way from the capital of Florida. So it's a very conscious decision if I wanted to go there and be an activist. I will say that so far my local work, which like Nancy, I've been pushed by the national elections into local work. I would say that it has been disarmingly easy, because the UU sat down and did, over 3 or 4 weeks, a vision statement of what it would be like to collaborate in the community based on trainings like this, especially that Allie and Caitlin and Nora have shared with us. We did our vision of how we would be in relationship, and then we stepped out in the last 2 weeks, and I have to report that the world was just waiting for a leader. And we all of a sudden have too much to do, and we're going to have to start prioritizing in just 2 weeks. Wow. So we didn't have to go into personal, deep soul searching to find work. It fell in our laps. So come back and talk to me in about a year. That's how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you all so much. All right. So that's the shape of our conference call. I wonder if Karen or our presenters, if you would like to say a few final words before we sign off.
I propose Karen.
You do.
I nominate Karen.
I'm going to quote you, Caitlin. You know, it's very funny that you said that I was bringing this sense of the spiritual or whatever, but because I get so much of that from you each time. You and Nora bring it every time. So I think what I'm going to do is go back. Boy, oh boy. So I think this is something, I don't know if Nora wrote it or if Caitlin or both of you, but you have written spiritual reminders in your 30 Days of Love, Fortifying the Movement. In week 4, you say, treat relationship building, maintenance, and conflict with deep care. They are the center of this work over the long haul. The liberation of ourselves and of all people and the planet are no loftier, cannot be any loftier a goal, and remind ourselves that this indeed is why we are in this work, for the liberation of ourselves, of all people, and the planet. And may it be so for us all. Caitlin and Nora, thank you so much for everything you do every day. Everyone know that we'll all have these devastating moments and that we're all feeling awake. And that's what it means in part to be awake, is to feel that devastation and to reach out. And there will be, I know I hold love for all of us and so much gratitude. So blessings, everyone. Thank you.
So much. Thanks so much for having us. It's been beautiful to be here. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Goodbye, goodbye.
Goodbye, goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Guy, it's good to see you again. It took me a minute to recognize